Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
hmm
Today, we are going to be looking at something called Meditations on Dualities.
Okay.
And this comes from an ancient text called the Vigyan Bhairava Tantra, which we've been talking about a little bit.
Yes.
Um, and we're going to be using excerpts from a conversation about this practice as our guide today.
Yeah.
So, have you ever felt like life is just this, constant tug of war between opposites?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. All the
You
time.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's just back and forth and you're kind of stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, this technique that we're going to be talking about is all about finding peace right in the middle of that struggle, like
Wow.
right in the middle of that tug of war.
Yeah. You know what's really interesting about the Vigyan Bhairava Tantra is that it doesn't view these dualities like hot and cold,
Okay,
success and failure, joy and sorrow as enemies.
right.
It sees them as like these essential parts of existence,
Yeah.
almost like two sides of the same coin.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So it's not about trying to eliminate one side of the duality.
Right.
Because let's be real, who hasn't tried to chase happiness and avoid sadness like it's some kind of Olympic sport?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And that's where this meditation technique comes in. It's about shifting our perspective.
Right.
Seeing those dualities not as things to fight against, but as these like natural expressions of reality.
Right.
And the goal is to cultivate a state of equanimity
Okay.
where we can kind of experience both sides without getting totally swept away by them.
Okay. That makes sense. But how do you actually meditate on dualities?
Right.
Is this something I can do like when I'm stuck in traffic or waiting for my coffee to brew?
Well, those everyday chaos moments might not be the ideal setting,
Okay.
but the technique itself is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
The source suggests finding a quiet place, closing your eyes, and focusing on a pair of opposites.
Okay, so let's say I choose hot and cold.
Okay.
What am I supposed to do with those? Just think about them.
Well, it's a little more active than just thinking about them.
Okay.
You actually want to bring your attention to like the actual experience of those opposites.
Okay.
So like, what does heat feel like in your body?
Right.
What about cold? And you pay attention to the sensations and maybe the thoughts that come up
Mm-hmm.
and just notice how they can shift and change.
So it's like I'm becoming like this curious observer of my own internal experience.
Exactly.
But what's the benefit of just noticing these sensations? Where's
Well,
the aha moment?
that's where it gets really interesting because as you observe these shifting sensations, you start to realize that while the feelings themselves are temporary,
Okay.
the awareness that's observing them remains constant.
Okay.
It's like being the eye of the storm.
Mm.
Everything is swirling around you,
Uh-huh.
but your center stays like steady and calm.
Whoa, I love that visual. It's like you find that inner peace that everyone's always talking about.
Exactly. And that sense of inner peace is a major benefit of this practice.
Yeah. Now, the source mentions other dualities too, like joy and sorrow and comfort and discomfort. Is it like leveling up the practice when you start to incorporate those?
Think of it as like expanding your understanding.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about equanimity?
Yes.
When we see all these dualities as equal expressions of life?
Right.
It's like we stop resisting the so-called negative experiences.
Okay.
So
Mm.
instead of constantly chasing happiness and running from sadness, we kind of learn to accept both.
So it's not about denying our emotions, but it's about seeing them as part of a bigger picture.
Precisely. And the Vigyan Bhairava Tantra actually suggests that this shift in perspective can significantly impact our well-being. It
Hmm.
can help reduce stress and ultimately free us from being trapped by, those constant swings between what we like and what we dislike.
Wait, are you telling me that this meditation technique could be the secret to finally chilling out? Because
Yes.
sign me up.
Well, it's not a magic bullet, but there's definitely a connection between this practice and finding more peace of mind.
Hmm.
Think about it. If you're constantly chasing one side of a duality and rejecting the other, you're essentially creating your own suffering.
You mean when I convince myself that I'll finally be happy once I get that promotion, only to find myself stressed out about the next big thing?
That's a perfect example. The Vigyan Bhairava Tantra teaches that both sides of a duality are temporary. So success fades into failure. Joy eventually gives way to sorrow. It's a continuous cycle.
Right.
But if we can recognize this impermanence,
Okay.
we can kind of loosen our grip on our need to control everything.
Mm.
And that clinging and aversion is what keeps us on that emotional roller coaster.
So it's about understanding that it's all fleeting,
Exactly.
both the good and the bad.
Exactly. And that understanding is what can ultimately lead to a sense of inner freedom. We can experience the full spectrum of human emotion
Right.
without being completely consumed by it.
Okay. Now, before we move on, I want to clarify something. Do we meditate on just one duality at a time?
Okay.
Or can we like mix and match?
That's the beauty of this practice.
Yeah.
You can tailor it to your needs.
Yeah.
So if one particular duality is really prominent in your life right now, it might be helpful to focus on that one.
Okay, so if I'm struggling with work-life balance, I could just focus on the duality of work and rest.
Exactly. But you could also incorporate multiple dualities into a session.
Right.
You could even switch it up day to day,
Right.
depending on what feels relevant.
Yeah.
It's all about experimenting and finding what works best for you.
I love that emphasis on like personal exploration. So it's not like this one-size-fits-all approach.
Okay.
But ultimately, what are we striving for here? What's like the big picture benefit of meditations on dualities?
You know, the source highlights this crucial takeaway, which is learning to see dualities as natural expressions of reality.
Okay.
So instead of these opposing forces, they become like these complementary aspects of a unified whole.
Right.
And by transcending the limitations that we usually place on these dualities,
Yeah.
we can connect with like a deeper level of inner stillness and harmony.
So it's about finding that balance,
Exactly.
that peace no matter what's happening externally. That sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But how do we actually bring this practice into our daily lives?
That's a great question. A perfect transition to the next part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
where we're going to explore some practical techniques and strategies that you can use to make this practice your own. So, you know, a fantastic starting point is simply becoming more aware of the dualities that like pop up in your everyday life. You know, those little moments where you catch yourself wanting things to be different or feeling frustrated when they're not.
Oh, you mean like when I'm convinced my day will be ruined if I don't get my usual morning latte?
Exactly.
Or when I get annoyed that the train is delayed even though it's totally out of my control?
Exactly. Those are perfect examples. And the Vigyan Bhairava Tantra encourages us to not just like passively experience these reactions, but to actually actively label them in our minds. You know, you can even say to yourself like, okay, there's that desire for comfort kicking in, or here comes the aversion to discomfort.
So it's like we're becoming scientists of our own minds,
Yeah.
observing these patterns without judgment.
I love that analogy.
Mhm.
And once you start to see these patterns more clearly, you can start applying the principles of meditations on dualities.
Okay, so instead of resisting that discomfort, I should try to approach it with the same curiosity and acceptance as I would comfort. That sounds like a tall order, especially when it comes to things like missing my train or spilling coffee all over myself.
Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate one side of the duality, but to see them both as equal parts of the whole.
Yeah.
It's about expanding your capacity to hold both the light and the shadow within yourself.
It sounds like this could be a really powerful tool for dealing with stress, because isn't a lot of stress just us resisting what is?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why the source suggests that this practice can actually help us transcend suffering. When we cling to one side of a duality and reject the other, we're essentially creating suffering for ourselves.
Mhm.
It's like we're stuck on this never-ending treadmill, constantly chasing after what we want and running away from what we don't want.
Oh, wow. I can totally relate to that feeling of being on a treadmill, especially when it comes to things like work and my never-ending to-do list. It's like I'm always striving for that elusive feeling of being caught up, but it never really happens.
But imagine if you could step off that treadmill. What if you could accept that both pleasure and pain, success and failure, are just part of the human experience? That's the kind of freedom that meditations on dualities offers.
Okay, I'm starting to see how powerful this could be.
Mm.
So instead of constantly trying to control everything and make things different than they are, I can just be present with what is, even if what is a giant mess of deadlines and spilled coffee.
Exactly. It's about finding that inner peace amidst the chaos. And the more you practice, the less reactive you become to those external ups and downs.
Right. And the source mentions that this can even impact our relationships, right?
Absolutely. When you're less consumed by your own desires and aversions, you can show it for others with more compassion and understanding. It's like your inner state of being has a direct impact on your outer experience.
So this isn't just like some esoteric meditation technique.
Right.
It has real-world implications for how we live our lives.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that's a key principle in many spiritual traditions. As within, so without.
Okay, so for someone who's hearing all of this and thinking, sign me up, where do I start?
Okay.
What are some practical tips for incorporating meditations on dualities into daily life?
Well, I always recommend starting with a duality that feels particularly relevant to your life right now. Maybe it's the duality of work and rest, or connection and solitude.
Mm.
You know, it's something that you're already grappling with on a daily basis. Once you've chosen your duality, find a quiet place where you can sit or lie down comfortably. Close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, and just start to notice the sensations associated with each side of the duality.
So if I'm working with the duality of work and rest, I might notice the tension in my shoulders when I think about work and that feeling of relaxation when I think about taking a break.
Exactly. You're already getting it.
Yeah.
Remember, the key is to simply observe these sensations without judgment. Let them come and go like waves on the ocean. Don't get caught up in analyzing or trying to change them.
So it's like I'm giving myself permission to experience the full range of my emotions,
Yeah.
both the pleasant and the unpleasant, without getting swept away by them.
You got it. And as you become more comfortable with this practice, you can start to incorporate more dualities into your meditations and even start applying these principles to your daily life. Imagine noticing those dualities as they arise throughout your day and responding to them with a newfound sense of awareness and equanimity.
It sounds like this could be a game changer for how I navigate like the complexities of life. It's like I'm being given a whole new set of tools for dealing with stress, finding inner peace, and even improving my relationships.
It truly is a powerful practice, and the more you explore it, the more you'll discover its incredible potential to transform your life from the inside out.
This deep dive into meditations on dualities has been incredibly insightful. But before we wrap things up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on one last point from the source material. It mentions that this practice can help us tap into a state of inner stillness and harmony. What does that actually mean, and how do we know when we've achieved it?
That's a wonderful question and a perfect segue into the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore the ultimate goal of meditations on dualities and how it can lead us to a profound sense of inner peace.
So you're talking about the state of inner stillness and harmony. It sounds amazing, but what does it actually feel like? Is it like floating on a cloud or something?
Well, it's tough to capture with words because it's more of a lived experience than a concept.
Right.
But the source material gives us some clues.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me those clues.
Well, the source talks about it as a profound sense of peace and tranquility, like feeling centered and grounded even when life feels kind of chaotic.
So it's like finding that eye of the storm that we talked about before. But how do we know when we've actually reached that state? What are the signs we're on the right track?
Well, one indicator is a decrease in how reactive you are. Remember those patterns of desire and aversion?
Yes.
As you practice meditations on dualities, those patterns start to loosen their grip.
Yeah.
You're not so easily swayed by what's happening around you.
So those things that used to push my buttons don't bother me as much. I can stay more balanced even when things don't go my way. That's a pretty big deal, right?
It is. And this increased stability can affect all parts of your life, your relationships, your work, your overall well-being.
It's like building up this inner strength and resilience that I can tap into whenever I need it. But this all sounds pretty aspirational. Can we really achieve this inner stillness and harmony in this lifetime, or is it just a nice idea?
That's a great question. And the Vigyan Bhairava Tantra suggests it's both. It's a lifelong journey, a constant process of refining our understanding. But with practice, we start to get glimpses of that deeper state of being.
So it's not about reaching some final destination, but about the journey itself.
Yeah.
Each step bringing us closer to that peaceful place within.
Beautifully put. And the great thing is anyone can do this practice. It doesn't matter what your background is or your beliefs are. It's about cultivating awareness and the ability to kind of hold life's dualities with that sense of equanimity.
That's really empowering. We all have this potential to tap into inner stillness and harmony, to find that peace within ourselves. For our listeners who are inspired to try this out, what advice would you give them?
Well, I always say, start small. Pick one duality that speaks to you and start noticing it in your everyday life. How do your mind and body react to each side of that duality? And remember, no judgment or self-criticism. It's all about observation and exploration.
Great advice. And our listeners can always revisit the excerpts from that conversation about meditations on dualities that we've been diving into today. There's so much wisdom and guidance packed in there. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into a technique for navigating all those ups and downs life throws at us. I hope you found it as insightful as I have.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
And to our listeners, keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep discovering that incredible potential within you. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought. How might your life change if you stopped seeing dualities as opposing forces and started seeing them as parts of a unified whole? Until next time, keep diving deep and keep seeking that inner sanctuary.